Hey guys, Toolman Tim here. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. It's an unplanned, unexpected Saturday morning episode of the Workshop Podcast Live. And if you guys follow me, you know, last Sunday I had uh, Amy Dingman on here where we talked about not being scared to suck, trying new things, getting out there and learning new things as we go. And this today is going to be a topic that's a passion of mine. And I tried it about a month ago. It was a huge hit. So I figure, hey, maybe once a month we'll do something like this. So for the record, it's February 12th. 2022, got the year right there. And this is episode 69 of the Workshop Podcast. No jokes there. Okay. So anyway, real quick, if you haven't yet, join the Telegram group. Sometimes I put announcements up there, but it's just a really cool place for the workshop community to hang out, interact, and learn some cool things. Share with each other. And also, do not forget to sign up for the contest. Toolmantim.co. That's where we go. 2 more days. Monday night will be the live stream draw of it. We got some really cool prepper gear we're giving away. So make sure you get in there, sign up, and get going. Anyway, okay, so I love these impromptu Saturday morning live streams. I put together a few pictures for you too, so if you're watching along, you get to see some cool 80s posters of some of this post-apocalyptic movies. So if I forgot any, or as you're following along, you're like, Tim, you're an idiot, I don't agree, or wow, I've never heard of that, or let me share with you. I want to do follow-ups to these down the road, so share with me some of the movies that you love from the 80s. There's just something, I don't know exactly what the word for it is, but just so full of cheese from the 80s, but also so full of dread when, you know, it seemed like, you know, the threat of nuclear war was always just hanging over everyone's head, right? And that kind of permeates pretty much all 5 plus 1 bonus pick of the movies I had today. So with that being said, let's dive right in. So we're going to go backwards from 5 to 1. And like I said, I got 1 bonus pick to put in there for you. So let's see if we can bring this up here. First off, so number 5 is Maximum Overdrive. If you guys haven't seen that movie, well, it is pure and utter cheese. And you will know that there are certain movies that I love that are, you know, really cool, funny, but cheesy movies. You know, one of my all-time favorite kind of horror comedies is Tremors. We'll probably do a list on, you know, post-apocalyptic comedy movies at some point. But if you haven't seen Maximum Overdrive, let me tell you a little bit about it. It is 2 of my favorite things in the entire world combined in one movie. Stephen King and AC/DC. And this movie wasn't just based on a Stephen King short story. The screenplay was also written by Stephen King, and it is the one and only film ever directed by Stephen King. And if you wonder why this was the only movie he ever directed, well, then you haven't seen this movie. So take a minute, watch the movie, and you'll know why it's the only one he ever directed. It was in the height of his coke-fueled days. It was in the early to mid 80s where he was just absolutely coked out of his mind all the time. Now, the story, without, you know, I always hate to spoil or ruin any movie for you, but if you haven't seen it before, yes, it is the best soundtrack ever. I love it. I mean, I can listen to AC/DC on repeat. I know some people say their music is just, you know, repetitive, but they know it works and they keep doing it. Morning, Ted. How are you? So, story goes, first off, if Stephen King wanted AC/DC to do the entire soundtrack, he went and met with them in person and ended up singing one of their songs. I can't remember which one it was. Start to finish, knew the words off by heart, and they agreed to do the entire soundtrack. And people didn't even realize that it was a soundtrack to a movie when they released it on vinyl because they're like, we didn't know. And a lot of it was, you know, just re-recordings of old songs, but there was a couple of new ones on there. Anyway, if you haven't followed this, it is pure and utter 80s cheese. A comet passes close to Earth. Earth passes through the tail of the comet. And for whatever reason, there's some kind of supernatural power in that comet and causes vehicles, electronic, you know, basically it causes vehicles to become sentient. And I mean, this was long before there was computers in anything. I don't know how this works. How, you know, there's literally no explaining it. Just the fact that the vehicles go crazy and decide it's time to start killing humanity. It has a very common kind of plot where, a ragtag group of survivors have to hold up in this case, it's like a diner, but it's very similar to the original zombie movie Night of the Living Dead. It just has that feel where everybody's kind of claustrophobically in there and they're trying to come up with a plan. Also very similar to the movie The Mist, if you've seen that, in that kind of sense. But cool kind of piece of trivia about this movie. It had, like I said, it has a lot of similarities to the original Night of the Living Dead. If you know, George A. Romero was the director. Apparently, he was the ghost director of this film. He came in to finish up some of the scenes and offer quite a bit of advice, as Stephen King apparently had to end up going off into rehab again because of his love for cocaine. So if you haven't seen this, it's an absolute treat. The effects don't hold up. You know what, guys? Two people have mentioned Escape from New York, and I had forgotten. Not forgotten. It's not on this list. I love it. I grew up during the Escape from LA time. That movie was so cheesy, but I had gone back and watched Escape from New York down the road. So if I do a follow-up, 5 more 80s post-apocalyptic films, Escape from New York is going to be on there. But like I said, if you haven't, take a minute, check out Maximum Overdrive. I love it. It would never have won any Oscars. It wouldn't have won any awards whatsoever, but it is just pure and utter 80s goodness. Okay, so number 4, and this may be one that you guys have never heard of before. And if that's the case, it's totally fine. We'll bring it up here. So number 4 is Threads. Now, like I said, if you haven't heard of this movie, I don't blame you. It's totally fine. This was a made-for-TV British movie the BBC did in 1984. It was, okay, if you're looking for a happy ending movie, don't watch this movie. This movie is as depressing as it comes. It is probably the most realistic depiction of what would happen if a major metropolitan area ended up going on and dealing with just all the after effects of a nuclear, and this movie's incredible. So it's really hard to explain per se, but it has a feel of a documentary, even though it's not. It was, excuse me, from what a lot of scientists have watched, they've said this is the most scientifically accurate depiction of nuclear fallout and waste that happens. So if you haven't watched it, give yourself a chance, look it up. This was a hard one to find over the years. Way back when I wanted to watch this, I couldn't find it anywhere. I ended up having to find it on uTorrent or BitTorrent somewhere and downloading it and watching it because it just wasn't available. However, I did some digging and apparently Tubi has it, and there is a free version of it on YouTube. Now, this movie is incredible in scope. It actually runs 20 years, so it feels epic. It starts in 1983 and ends up following all the way through to 2003. And spoiler alert, things don't get any better. After Ted Turner saw this movie, if you guys know Ted Turner, he founded TBS and CNN and all that. He was so moved by it that he decided he wanted to bring it over and show it, but he couldn't get any advertisers to show it, so he paid to show it on his networks and channels out of his own pocket, which, wasn't the craziest thing in the world. The director, he decided to hire, first, if you guys know Coronation Street, it's a long-term British soap opera, kind of a daytime thing. They were going to hire a bunch of actors from there, and then they decided to go with unknown actors simply to make it more real, to feel kind of, just, you didn't want anything to take you out of the illusion that you're in it. And it is absolutely the case. So they take some time and build the story with, fake news footage, fake newspaper headlines, that kind of stuff. And then they follow the story through basically as a small town, a small city. I think it's Sheffield, England, how the local government falls apart, how they try to keep things together, and how the entire world just goes to shit. It's just awful. And I mean, they did it on a fairly low budget. They filmed the whole thing in 17 days. You know, the effects of the radiation burns were done with ketchup and Rice Krispies, but there is nothing about this film that feels fake or disingenuous or non-authentic. It's scary as hell. That's one of only a couple of movies that when I was done, I literally felt, just anxious and depressed. The Road was one of them. We'll talk about that down the road. And this movie, Threads, was another one. There's one more on this list that's not much better. And yeah, it was. Yes. Well, Ted, Ted says this reminds him of The Day After. Hang in there for about 30 seconds and you'll find out. But this movie's so scary because it, is just literally something that could happen. It has that realistic feel to it. And if you guys are wondering, am I some kind of masochist or something? Do I love to put myself through watching all these old, awful movies? Well, I don't know. There's something cathartic about it. It allows you to deal with fears and deal with, anxieties about the world. It's the same reason that people watch horror movies, it's a way for you to deal with some of the craziness. And you know what? Excuse me, guys. It sometimes gives me some ideas. I'm like, oh, I wouldn't do this or I wouldn't do that. And who knows what you would or wouldn't do, right? But anyway, so that number 4 was Threads. Number 3, Ted, as you may have predicted already, is The Day After. And if you guys haven't seen this movie, this is the crazy thing, okay? So the tagline on the poster says, they told us it would be impossible for us to make this movie. They told us it would be impossible for you to watch it. We hope nothing is impossible. And then a much darker, deeper tagline was, when war games are real. Hey, Sunnyland, how are you? And okay, so The Day After and Threads are basically sister movies. The crazy thing was they were both being made separately, one from the US, one from BBC, and they didn't really know about each other. The Day After came out a year before Threads, so that's why I put it one spot higher on the list. But after the director of Threads seen the movie, he was worried he wouldn't want to keep making his, but he said, you know what? I feel like our movie is going to be even more gritty and more realistic. So take that for what you will. This one, again, was another made-for-TV movie. So out of the 5 of my favorite post-apocalyptic 1980s movies, 2 of them were made for TV. And this was back when movies weren't made for TV. Nowadays, all kinds of them are made, top quality HBO, Netflix, that kind of stuff. But this one was, again, made for a TV movie. And again, the director decided he was going to basically go with unknown actors, which was cool because it gives you kind of that, small town dread. You don't know, these people maybe look familiar, but you don't really know them. And then it ended up, when you watch it today, you're like, oh, I know him. And that's John Lithgow. And then I'm like, oh, that's Steve Guttenberg. And so there are people in it that you'll recognize, but at the time they did it that way on purpose. And for some reason, these nuclear movies seem to love Kansas. If you guys have seen Jericho, talked about that before, that took place in Kansas, and The Day After also takes place in Kansas. And they basically deal with, the day before, the day of, and the day after. And again, this is, Russia decides it's time to invade Germany, and they get into a big fight. They kind of leave it ambiguous as to who drops the first nuke, but it doesn't matter at that point because there's nukes coming in both directions. I believe in the movie they say there's 300 ICBMs heading to the US. This movie had at the time over 100 million viewers for a made-for-TV movie. So people were nervous. People were scared about the real absolute. At the time they felt like the chance. Is the chance any higher or lower at this point? Maybe not, but these movies both preyed on the fears of people, but also allowed people to deal with their fears. And Martinson family says, agree, thinking through the fiction of it helps the anxiety of reality. And I've probably told you guys this story before, but I think a big portion of my passion for this kind of stuff came from growing up in an evangelical home. and they used to show these cheesy 80s movies called A Thief in the Night, where basically it's, the Christian version of the world, the end of the world. And they literally scared the shit out of me. And I think I used a lot of this fiction and stuff to deal with those fears when I was a kid, but now I just love it. But yeah. And Ted says, a great book to read along these lines is Swan Song. I read it when I was a teenager, in case it sucks now. So if you guys are interested, I'd love to do books, maybe even a couple of video games. I don't know, comic books, but yeah, definitely books. And if you're looking for another story that's very similar to this, that is not a happy ending, The Beach is really good as well, but we'll deal with that down the road. So in the day after, you can literally see people on their back deck and they look out and there's all these underground missile silos in the prairies in Kansas, and just all the missiles just go, and you can just feel the dread. It's scary, and right afterwards, the day after, people are dealing with contaminated or no water at all, no electricity, burnt down buildings, radiation sickness. It follows, a big portion of this story is a doctor in the hospital dealing with all of the effects of the radiation sickness and how burnout and wore down he gets. And just, the reason the director left it ambiguous was because it really didn't matter who pushed the first button. It just meant that the world was going to hell. Everything was awful. It didn't matter, if you were out there surviving at that point, it didn't matter who started it. Both sides finished it, and it was an absolute disaster. Out of the Sunnyland Camper says, Out of the Ashes series was a great read. I'm adding that to my list, my friend. Thank you very much. See, this is why I do these, as much to find out other movies and books to read. And out of last month's episode, where I did my favorite TV series, rewatchable post-apocalyptic TV series, Kerry Brown sent me an email. I got a shout out to him. He told me about a book series called World Made by Hand, and I'm into the third book already, and it's awesome. It's weird, but it's some of the best world building. It takes place after zero oil, when they run out of oil, the world. Anyway, really good. So check that one out too, guys. All right. And here's another interesting thing dealing with the day after. So of course it was made for TV. So what they have to do, they had to sell commercial time, right? So they were able to sell commercials for the first half of the movie, but the second half of the movie ran without commercials. And the reason is that all of the different companies wanted nothing to do with the show after the nuclear bomb was dropped. I think that's a little bit funny or foolish, because you're literally advertising in the movie halfway through, but they decided that there was just no reason to run commercials during the end of it. So I just thought it was kind of crazy. So yeah, and Martinson Family says Ashes was great as well. But yeah, if you guys can find these two movies, Threads and The Day After, they're sister movies, they're good companion movies, and they are absolutely worth taking a minute and finding them. But again, I wouldn't watch them too close together, because these are a few of the movies that can actually have a bit of a psychological effect on you. They are scary, but they're definitely worth checking them out. Okay, so number 2. And if you guys haven't seen this one, this was a movie that I was introduced to about 15 years ago from my wife, The Miracle Mile. And this has everything that I love in a post-apocalyptic movie. It's pure and utter 80s, cheese. Once again, I've probably said that about 5 times, but it absolutely is. It's late 80s, so it kind of has that same feel as like Die Hard, and that, everything has that really like neon-y kind of weird look. It takes place in Los Angeles. It takes place in the evening. And it's what I call, even though it's a big in scope movie, I call it a closed in or a small film. And what I mean by a small film is, something that takes place either in a short period of time, or with just a few people, or just in a real enclosed area. And this one, despite the fact that there's, thousands or millions of people in LA, takes place basically with just, around a guy and a girl. And it's a young Anthony Edwards, who used to play Dr. Green on ER. He does this before. And Mare Winningham is the lady. Anyway. So if you haven't seen this, Okay, first off, I'll tell you the acting's a little over the top because it was an 80s end of the world movie. But I love how it's a time capsule of 1988, what the world looked like, and just every cliche of 80s LA is in there. So Anthony Edwards meets this girl. They hit it off, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to meet later on tonight for a date?" And he gets held up and doesn't quite get to her in time. But as he's leaving a diner, the phone rings. It's a an old payphone. You know how that used to work. And once in a while, and for whatever reason, he decides to pick it up. And he picks up the phone, and it's a son. If I remember exactly, it's a son on the other end of the line who is on a military base, and he's trying to get a hold of his dad. And he dialed the number wrong. And he basically says, "You know what? We've got the bombs have gone. You got like an hour or whatever it is to survive. Deal with it." And he's like, "Is this real?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, it's real." And so they end up talking about it. He freaks out. He goes back into the diner for a minute. And at this point, I gotta, tell a quick story about that diner. I love that diner. I don't know what it is. There's just something beautiful about it. And it was called Johnny's Coffee Shop. And apparently it's still in LA. Hasn't ran in 20 years or more, but it's like it was built in 1956. And it was, if you've ever heard of this, it's called Googie style architecture. And I just love it. It looks like it belongs in a poster. And if you don't know what Googie style architecture was, it's basically what people in the 50s thought the future was going to look like. And it's just this futuristic 80s, 1950s combination of a diner. And it's awesome. So anyway, so the rest of this movie is him, trying to find this girl that he met. And basically, because he knows he doesn't have time to get out of the city. And, I don't want to spoil it, but there's, again, no real happy ending in this movie. And what I love the most about it, and what is absolutely completely scary, is how the world just completely falls apart in like an hour, just as the sun's coming up. The whole movie is filmed basically at night. The only time that it starts to lighten up is at the very end. They had Wilshire Boulevard. They got shut down for 2 days, and they filmed this entire just mob scene there. And that's one of the scenes that just sticks out to me in this movie. I loved it. It is definitely, again, it's a movie full of dread, but it's also a love story, and it's a lot of fun. Sonny Land says he gave all his away when he moved off grid. Movies or books or whatever, but either way, yeah. But so yeah, if you want to take a few minutes, go down a rabbit hole, find yourself a time capsule of an 80s film that tells a really good story. It's full of dread. This is one of those movies that I've watched a few times over the years, and it's fun. It's the type, if it was a Sunday afternoon, well, not that we have cable or anything anymore, but if it were a Sunday afternoon and I was flipping through, this is the type of movie that would have played on, ABC or CBS at, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I would watch it. Oh, Ashes series. Okay. Sunnyland, right on. Okay. So that was, yes. Ted knows. He says it's Johnny's Coffee Shop now. It's been in a plethora of movies. And yeah, it has. It's just a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous cafe / diner. I should have had a picture up here, guys. I'll get better at this. I'm still, remember how I said, don't be afraid to suck a little bit. Well, I've been doing these to kind of get used to doing slides and stuff during the live stream. So if you're watching the video, you know how it is. So, okay. So that is the bottom 4 of the top 5. And real quick, here is a throw-in bonus. And this one is Pulse. And if you haven't seen this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I've only ever watched it one time, but this was one of those movies that I originally watched the remake first. And there's a 2006 remake, which has not aged very well, but it's, kind of that mid 2000s. All the movies looked the same back then. It's got a young Kristen Bell in it. If you've seen her from The Good Place or Veronica Mars, a few other places, but it's basically where the cell phones take over people's bodies. Anyway, I watched it. I liked the movie. And after a while, I found out that there was a 1980s version of it as well. It's kind of got a similar feel to Maximum Overdrive. And it's, again, where things like coffee makers and blenders and stuff, just for whatever reason, morning, Veronica, for whatever reason, there is just, they don't explain it, but they start attacking humans. So if you're looking for a good, quick watch. This didn't quite make my cut, but I thought I would throw it in as just a bonus. I can't make a list and not have a bonus item on there. So, all right. So that is our top, almost there. So we started with Maximum Overdrive as number 5, Threads as number 4, The Day After as number 3. We had Miracle Mile as number 2. We threw in the bonus as Pulse. And does anybody want to make a prediction real quick in the live stream what my number 1 post-apocalyptic 1980s movie was? I bet almost everybody, it's actually been mentioned at least once already. And if you can't think of it right now, I bet you'll be able to think of it here in just a minute. Let's start with this. Let's try. If I hollered out Wolverines at the top of my lungs, oh, you were close, Ted. That'll be on my follow-up list. Ted guessed War Games. So if I hollered out Wolverines at the top of my lungs, would anybody know what my number 1 pick would be? So here it is. Red Dawn. Mad Max is another great one. Good choice, guys. So, okay. This is one of those, when I first met my wife, Becky, you know how, as you get comfortable as a couple and everything, you have these inside jokes and things. And, I always would joke with her that she has about a dozen movies that if it's on TV, it does not matter which movie, whatever we're doing, we would sit down and watch it. 2012 was one of those. Day After Tomorrow, just there's a bunch. Maybe I'll get her on to talk about those sometime. But if I made a list of movies that I absolutely would have to watch if they were on TV, this is at the top of my list. I probably saw it for the first time about 15 years ago. A lot of these movies I was introduced to from my wife, who's a big horror fan, post-apocalyptic fan. And I have probably watched it 20 times since. I think it was originally on demand back before on demand was a real thing or whatever. We had it and watched it, and I fell in love with it. I mean, this is the absolute epitome of prepper porn. It is like so many, at least guy preppers kind of dream. You'd love to just move out in the woods and live on your own and fight back as a ragtag bunch of, rednecks who basically got, shotguns and deer rifles, and you want to do guerrilla warfare against them. And I love this movie. It is the absolute epitome of 80s post-apocalyptic. And I use that word as a kind of a catch-all. It can be just basically an absolute changing of life and destruction of the world around you. And this movie is just awesome. It's action from start to finish. It has great, relationships in it. The acting isn't that bad. Ted says Red Dawn is happening today, only it isn't the Soviets. No, but it's close. So first off, if you've never seen this, watch it. I mean, the original tagline says full-scale military invasion by foreign troops begins. Total surprise, almost total success. But it wasn't. I mean, they hit. And I mean, they take people, basically take over all these small towns. Remember, it's the Soviets and the Cubans. And the entire movie is just so much fun from start to finish. When the guy's standing in the internment camp and he hollers out, "Avenge me!" And I mean, that's become a meme in and of itself. And, when every time they attack the bad guys and the guys holler out Wolverines and they start, building up, support from all the locals. It's just, the movie's awesome. And like I said, I've watched it so many times. Patrick Swayze is just great in it. It is what it is, but the acting is pretty good. The action is awesome. I did some research on this. It turns out they didn't use any CGI. They didn't even use any miniatures. Every explosion in that movie is full size and real. And that is what I love about it. It just has this real gritty feel. It's a violent movie. It turns out it was the first movie ever released in theaters to get the PG-13 rating, which is kind of cool. There's a whole story behind that. We'll go down that another day. But it was just, yeah. Also, do yourself a favor. Do not watch I mean, unless you want to watch a slow moving train wreck, don't bother with the 2012 remake. It's got a young Thor in it. The guy that plays Thor. It's just not very good. It's everything that the first movie wasn't. And yeah, I mean, if you love an underdog story with a post-apocalyptic backdrop, then Red Dawn is for you. I know it's become cliche. We all talk about Red Dawn, but the reason something becomes cliche is two. Number one, it's true. And number two, it's probably the originator. And then, you see all of these tropes in so many movies going forward. But if you haven't, do yourself a minute, do yourself a favor and watch this movie. If you only watch one on this entire list, this is at least the one that you'll leave feeling happy and not depressed. So anyway, guys, that's my list. I thought I'd put it together this morning for you. I've been working on it for a little bit, just, when I had time, put some notes together, and I thought, hey, we'll do one of our impromptu live streams. I love these Saturday morning live streams. Just whoever happens to be around pops in, and this will go up as part of the podcast feed as well, of course. And please give me your recommendations. Anybody listening in the after the fact on the live stream replays, or over on Float or Odyssey, or of course in the podcast feed, just contact me. Go over to Toolman Tim. You can fill out the form there. My email, you can send me therealtimcook@gmail.com. Add me on social. Doesn't matter. I want to hear what is your all-time favorite 1980s post-apocalyptic film. And we'll do a follow-up. Maybe we'll do 5 more, because you guys give me enough suggestions of movies that I'd completely forgot about when I put this list together, that maybe we could do a part B or part 2 or whatever it was. Sunnyland, have a great day. And also, guys, at 10 o'clock today, so in 40 minutes, if you're watching this, or you can catch it on the replay, don't forget my buddy Brian at the Lots Project. He's got Coffee with Brian on Saturday mornings, and he will be interviewing Carrie Brown from Strong Roots Resources. They're going to be talking about living outside the system. I'll put the link in the description. So even if you're listening to this after the fact as a replay, go and check out the replay for him. But also, Sunday night, Carrie Brown will be on my show as well. He's going to come on and talk about how he left working for the man, the 9-to-5 behind, how he made some incredible personal changes in his life, and how he's found freedom through entrepreneurship. I am excited. Carrie's a friend of the channel. He did a community member spotlight a while back, sent me a book in the mail. He's given me some good recommendations. He's just an all-around solid guy. So guys, again, I always say, but I really appreciate you guys coming by and spending some time in the workshop, because you have time to spend anywhere and you choose to come out and hang with me. So I appreciate it. Anyway, guys, as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.